Are you looking for the place to live that is sunny, warm, and tropical all year round? Well, it might not be Portugal, even though there might be a lot of people that tell you it is. Roll that intro. Hello there, I'm Rafael Di Furia, back at it again for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. This week, I wanted to talk about some of the realities of living in Portugal, some of, not necessarily the downsides, but some of what people may overlook, or maybe some topics that I see a lot of people who arrive here in Portugal feeling misled about. And the first one, of course, is the weather. Definitely in the north of the country, you're going to experience a lot more rain, a lot more gray, cloudy skies, but this can even be said about other parts of the country as well. Yes, it may be warmer and more pleasant than other parts of the world. However, it can get very rainy. I mean, even like I mentioned, I believe in a recent episode, it was, I think I said about 10 days in the last 4 months, about maybe less than 10 days of sun that we've actually had in the past 4 months. Whereas now I could say maybe it's between 10 and 14 days in the past 4 to 5 months where we've actually had days that were sunny. Coming from, I believe, this next week onwards, we're supposed to get sun at least until the end of the month. But still, we have had a lot of rain this winter, which has actually been very much needed. And also, there was a little bit of snow in some parts of the country, as well as flooding in some places like Porto. There were plenty of videos going around online. Maybe if I can remember, I'll try to at least share the link on my Facebook so that you can at least check that out there about the flooding that I'm talking about here, because it really was very intense there in a place that you wouldn't necessarily expect for flooding to occur. Although if you think about how the city is set up and where those specific points were, it kind of makes sense. But one thing that I often see and remember reading about in many articles years ago that had to do with life in Portugal and kind of what is offered here and what are the bonuses and benefits to living in a place like this. And that was some places saying 300 plus days of sun. But even in the Algarve, I know that there can be situations where maybe it would be only part of the day sunny, but it still might be counted as a sunny day anyway. But again, it's not just about Portugal, but I do hear a lot of people that come here complaining about that. And actually, even in the expat community this year, there have been a lot of people that I know of personally that have decided that because of how rainy and gray and cool it can be up here, that they're wanting to try a different part of the country because of that very specific factor. Many people don't realize that. And another factor that people don't realize when they are moving to Portugal is that a lot of articles, a lot of bloggers and influencers give this idea that you can get by in Portugal just speaking English. And there are some pockets of places that I would say that is somewhat true, especially maybe if you are married to somebody who's Portuguese or you have a significant other. Then, of course, maybe they'll help you take care of some of those things. But for the average person coming here, having the local language is more than absolutely necessary. I would say it doesn't matter what country you're going to, learn the language of the local people. But a lot of people seem to come here, and also in Braga, again, another thing I hear about in the local community, that people are like, oh, wow, gee golly gosh, it sure seemed as though from everything that was available online that there would be a lot more English-speaking opportunities here. But then after arriving here and realizing that maybe the way that things have been portrayed online wasn't exactly the reality that they were going to experience, can be very shocking to some people. So of course, I mean, even I can say with my own content, this is all from my perspective and the perspective of people that I've interacted with over the years. So I'm not going to say I have all of the right answers about everything. Listen to what I have to say, but do your own research, have your own experiences. Not Your Average Globetrotter is not the end-all be-all. Not Your Average Globetrotter is the stepping stone for you to have some of the basic information, maybe a little bit more than just the basic, so that you can get to experience some of these things on your own, while also taking into considerations the reality that you may find once you've gotten to wherever it is that you're going. And even a lot of the information that I talk about here on Not Your Average Globetrotter, whether I'm talking about specifically Portugal or in the past Italy or whatever country, there is a lot that you just replace the name of the country and fill in another one And it's a lot of very similar information. There will be some things that are very specific to one country. But then on top, there's another factor which a lot of people seem to kind of have a grasp on, but not necessarily have the full scope or the full picture of it. And I'm sure that even if you went to Google right now to read through some of the lists with the pros and cons of moving to Portugal, moving to Italy, moving to this, moving to that, whatever, it's going to talk about, oh, wow, the cost of living is so cheap, or it's so this, or it's so that, or whatever. And yes, the cost of living here can be lower than in other countries, but it has been going up. And some places like Lisbon are not as low cost as what many people had thought they might be, is not as low cost as they have been presented to be in the media, even television or whatever it may be, online media, old media, whatever it may be. There is this assumption that, oh, things are going to be dirt cheap, but look at the cost of rents and get a realistic idea, because they have been going up. Even there are some people that I know about, again, here in Braga, where say one person has been living in an apartment, like a one-bedroom apartment, paying 500 euros per month, but this year the rent is going up to 750. So that is a major increase. Yes, of course, this will be less expensive than some other places in the world. However, when you're looking at a 50% increase, that is massive. And with how in demand apartments have been, I will say I've seen landlords getting a little bit more independent and seeing landlords become a little bit less concerned about if the person is going to leave the apartment or not, because there's going to be someone else coming who's fresh off the boat who may not understand how much the prices actually should be and might not even try to negotiate on those prices. And even you find landlords that are becoming so bold that they are asking for anywhere from 6 months to 12 months of deposit. So like it would say maybe be like divided half for deposit, half for security. That's a lot of money that you have to come up with up front. I mean, even I was talking to a friend the other day, and the landlord for an apartment that they were looking at said 6 months. They negotiated it to 5 months. But then the landlord, or at least the agent, came back and said, well, actually in the end, 8 months. But I've heard of other places in the country where they've been asking for 12 months, which is absurd. You should never have to pay that much up front to get into an apartment. But unfortunately, it is becoming the norm. And there are a lot of landlords that are seeing that they can get away with that sort of thing. Again, this is not something that I would say is even unique to Portugal, but you do see it a lot more here than I would say maybe some other places that I've been. And in some cases, to get around that, you may have to find a Portuguese guarantor. But how many people from other countries are going to know a local guarantor? I think there are some companies that actually do offer that as a service that you can pay for, but still, like, that is a big deal. And so these are, again, factors that I think really have to be considered in a country like Portugal. And there are so many people coming to Portugal. This is another big factor. I'll say, even here the other day, I don't know if it was today or the other day, there was an article that came out saying that, again, there was a major increase in the number of foreigners coming to live here in Portugal. Again, yeah, I'm one of those people. But it's getting to a level where, even I've talked about this before, but it was already at that level where I was concerned, but I'm becoming more concerned as time goes on about how things will be affected and how things will start looking, and talking about the cost of living and rentals, or even purchasing a home, housing. I was at lunch with some friends the other day, a group of friends, and there happened to be two people there. The one guy's a banker and his girlfriend's a real estate agent. I'm not looking for a home or anything, but they just happen to be there, and they are under the impression that with the cost of living going up and also seeing inflation rise, that some of these costs are getting so high that it's going to be difficult for people to consider to start paying more for things like homes and so on. So they were thinking that the prices of homes may start coming down in the next months, like 5+ months. But that has me wondering, well, there are already a lot of people from other parts of the world that are looking at Portugal as a cost-effective option, as a cheap option. And what is this going to do? If this is the high point and people still think they're cheap and the prices go down from here, is that going to send some signals to kind of boost popularity and then make the issue even worse and put the price either at the same place where it is currently now or beyond because of that boosted interest there with international interest in purchasing property in Portugal. So this is one thing that I do wonder about, what things could look like over the next years. And in a way, do I think that maybe my arrival in Portugal was too late to see it at its best? Somewhat, but I also think there are still a lot of wonderful years left, and that it's not like, oh, that there's an expiration date or something, but I do think that there will be a point when it just becomes so overcrowded that what people really enjoy about this country will definitely be majorly affected. But before we're getting into the rest of the episode, I did just want to take a quick moment to say a huge thank you to those of you who helped to make this project possible on a monthly basis through Patreon or through the one-time donations or the shirts, mugs, onesies, and more. Thank you all so very much for being a part of this project, and also the likes and sharing it with your friends and subscribing to this channel. So really, thank you so very, very much. And then another aspect of the cost of living. Something that I find very necessary as somebody who works mostly remotely, the cost of internet and connection, being connected to other parts of the world, is very necessary for me and what I do. So, is Portugal less expensive maybe than what you might spend in the US? Possibly. But is it more than a lot of other places? Definitely. I would not say that this is a country where you can get a really good, cheap deal on phone service. Maybe in the US, you'll pay more at the end of the month, but you will get more for those services. I know about more plans that have huge amounts of gigabytes or unlimited plans, whereas here you can spend quite a bit, but still have limitations. I mean, even I know from one company I just recently was looking at what their offer was, and it was something like, say, 30 euros a month for unlimited internet, but it was capped at like 10 megabits per second. So very, very slow connection. But if you wanted to have the full speed of the network, then I think it would maybe be like something around 40 or 45. But I can say, for example, that when I was in Italy, 100 gigabytes per month, plus unlimited calls and texts, I believe I was paying, what, 6 euros a month, 5.90 for one phone line. And it was so cheap that it actually made sense for me to have a second phone line to separate work and personal, because it was just that cheap that my business line, I want to say, was 7.90. I mean, that's ridiculous per month, maybe 8 euros, 9 euros maximum. And again, 100 gigabytes, unlimited calls, as well as international calling included. These are things that I think are not necessarily the most important factors, but if you are somebody who is like me and looking to work remotely and have something based in the country where you're living, is definitely affect on what you earn at the end of the month or end of the year. But then also, of course, you have to take into consideration taxes, how business is done here. And there are certain things that when you are doing your own company, doing your own business, or if you're a sole proprietor, that you have a lot of limitations on, or that are very tricky to navigate in Europe in comparison to other parts of the world. Each different part of the world is going to have their own thing that's maybe a little bit more difficult and complicated here, or a little bit more difficult and complicated there. But there are certain things that I've seen in Europe across the board that seem to be maybe a bit more overcomplicated than what should be necessary. And regulations that, I mean, I'm not necessarily somebody who's against regulation, but I think there comes a point where it stifles growth of small businesses, especially. And having certain things in place, like, I mean, in Portugal, what is it? For an employee, you have to pay 14 months for every 12 months. Like, you have to give an extra 2 months of pay. So if you want to hire somebody, this starts becoming a very big drain on what your company is able to earn if you are a small business. But if you want to work with professionals who are sole proprietors, then that becomes a whole different thing. But still, you have to take those things into consideration if you are looking to do business from this part of the world. There are other benefits that really are very attractive and make it really nice to do business from here. But there are some things like that, those hurdles that you have to learn to work with. There's a lot of working in Portugal and Southern Europe and especially Southern Europe, but it's about figuring out how to work within the system and navigate the system and having people with you that you can rely on to give you good, reliable information on how to properly legally navigate things. But then even quickly jumping back to the whole internet thing, I know there are some people who have been receiving some notifications from their internet company that because of inflation, that their internet base price for their service will be going up by just shy of 8%. I would say that's a pretty significant increase in the monthly bill. And whatever they've been negotiating with some Portuguese authority to make sure this is okay. And there's something even within the contract that allows for this when you sign up. So it's like, you don't necessarily have recourse or even the ability to say, hey, I signed a contract for X amount. What's going on here? So signing a contract is that you're signing up for services for X period of time, but the guarantee of that price staying the same, it could, it might not, but it could, but it might not. It's hard to plan around certain things like that when your costs of operation just kind of start going up out of nowhere. But this is, of course, the world that we are living in now. And even though we're living in this world and something that you just have to move forward with, it's not something that I would say that I am personally happy with, as I'm sure just about everybody else could probably share that sentiment. Although we still have not seen a sharp spike in the price of eggs. They've been going up, but not as significant as what's going on in the States, which is horrifying. Different subject for a different day, though. But another thing that I've mentioned about Portugal and Southern Europe is that people enjoy the lifestyle. People want to move to this part of the world for what you can find here in that regard. But of course, this leads to both a relaxed mentality to enjoy life, but it can also lead into other things. And I'm not specifically talking about Portugal here. Please keep that in mind with what I'm about to say. But I have had this experience in a number of different countries. I can say at least 3 off the top of my head, but probably another 2 or 3 on top of that, where I've seen this type of work ethic when it comes to professionalism. For example, recently, like I mentioned actually in the last episode about my sign, I'm going to mention it again about my logo behind me. This actually, the reason why this exists is because this is a test print. This is a test job for a local print shop that I would like to do some work with for creating promotional materials for some clients of mine and whatever. I'm not going to go into all those details, but I think this story highlights something that I've seen a number of times, like I was mentioning, that I went in because I want to see first, would I be a client of this business? And if yes, then can they reliably be there for me and my company so that I can be there for my clients? Like, I think that makes sense. I hope I don't have to explain that any further. But I went in to get this sign made. And the first time it was done, the colors were off. Whatever, it can happen. This is normal when you're dealing with printing. But then they had to send it off. And what should have been a few-day job ended up getting pushed on and on and on. Took a few weeks in the end to get accomplished. But I can see that there's this pattern. Again, this happened with this thing and other things that it's on and on and on. And this is not about the business itself, but this is about how things can sometimes be done. So I don't want you to get distracted by the story that this is framed within, that it's to do with my work, but this can happen in other aspects of life as well. That you can see these things where it's like, oh, it's going to be done today, or oh, it's going to be done tomorrow, or oh, it'll be done XYZ, but oh, well, actually we're going to need a bit more time. Can this happen in other places in the world? Yes, and that's why I wanted to really emphasize this is not specific to Portugal, but this is something that you can definitely find here. I'm not going to say frequently, but enough to the point that you may notice it. Whereas in other parts of the world, yes, this thing can happen, but it would happen so infrequently that it might be a fluke. Whereas here, it might be something that you might have to plan around. And so you have to consider that whenever you're moving to any other part of the world, that things will be done differently than how you may expect them to be done in your home country. Some things may be better. Some things may be worse. Some things you may just have to say, hey, this is not something that I'm happy about, but I understand this is what I have to deal with, or that I have to work around this. So you figure out what are those things that you need to do to accomplish the goals that you set in front of yourself. And that gets into another factor, which I've mentioned many times, which is the small things in your life, how they end up making some of the biggest impact. That maybe some of these things where you have to figure out how to work around a problem rather than having an A to B solution might be something that you find in certain parts of the world where you might not necessarily find the same in another. So when I'm talking about the realities of living in Portugal, or the downsides, the supposed downsides, a lot of what I'm talking about here, like I said earlier in the episode, can be applied to other places. And you have to learn about these things, because if you are somebody that just needs things to function perfectly and just go smoothly, then there are going to be maybe other parts of the world that will be more in line with that. That's why I said in a very recent episode about 2 very important lessons, being able to take your time and having patience are so extremely important to living in Portugal, as well as many other places in the world. But I think this is where I'm going to round things out. So of course, a huge thank you to those of you who help to make content like this possible on a monthly basis through rafaeldefuria.com/Patreon or patreon.com/rafaeldefuria. It's because of you guys that this project is able to continue, as well as the one-time donations, for example. The thanks button here on YouTube also is another thing that makes a massive difference in the ability for this project to move forward. And also a big thank you for the likes, shares, and subscriptions to this YouTube channel. Of course, I'm Rafael de Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I will see you all next time. Later.